HR laughed that I was too broke to sue, but they didn't expect who walked into court with me. The moment they forced me out, I knew I would never be quiet about it. The rain was coming down hard as I walked into the HR office on that Friday afternoon. I'd been working at Hartwell Industries for 27 years. 27 years of showing up on time, delivering quality work, mentoring younger employees, and building a reputation as someone you could trust. But reputation doesn't matter when someone decides it's time to clear out the old guard. Lindsey Ford was the reason I was being called into this meeting. She'd arrived 6 months earlier from corporate headquarters, full of energy and ideas about modernizing the payroll department. She was sharp, ambitious, and completely without ethics, though I didn't know the full extent of that yet. The head of HR, a man named Victor, sat across from me with a file open on the desk. Lindsey stood by the window, arms crossed, wearing an expression that looked almost victorious. "Evelyn, we've discovered some serious issues with the payroll system," Victor began carefully. "Data mishandling, financial irregularities. We have reason to believe you're responsible." The accusation hit me like a punch. I'd done no such thing. I'd been thorough, careful, meticulous in my work. But before I could respond, Lindsey stepped forward. "Don't bother thinking about suing us, Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You can't even afford your own car insurance. You're a 57-year-old divorced woman with a modest salary. You'd never win." She smiled like she'd just delivered a clever joke. "Security will escort you out. Your employment is terminated effective immediately." The walk to the elevator felt like walking through water. People stared. My coworkers looked away, afraid to be associated with me. When I reached my car in the parking lot, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just breathing. Then I opened my glove compartment and pulled out an old manila folder. It was labeled Alan's Cases, 1999. Alan had been my husband. He'd been a labor lawyer before he passed away 8 years ago. Looking at that folder, I whispered something to his memory. "We'll see." Let me rewind 6 months. Before Lindsey arrived, Hartwell Industries was a stable company, nothing fancy but solid. I'd worked my way up from administrative assistant to senior payroll manager. I knew every detail of our financial operations. I could see problems that others missed. That's actually why I noticed the discrepancy so quickly. One morning in January, I was reviewing the automated payroll adjustments when I spotted something odd. There was a $38,000 miscellaneous adjustment that had been removed from the workers' overtime budget.
No explanation.
No authorization form. Just gone. I mentioned it to Lindsey during our morning meeting. She'd only been there 3 months, so I was still being helpful, thinking she'd appreciate someone pointing out potential issues. "That's probably just a transfer," she said without even looking at the details I'd prepared. "The software automatically reroutes funds sometimes." But the software didn't do that. I knew the system inside and out. No automatic rerouting happened without manual authorization. I should have pushed harder. I should have gone to someone above Lindsey immediately. But I didn't want to seem like I was undermining her authority. I wanted to be a team player. That hesitation would cost me. Over the next few months, I noticed more irregularities. Money moving in strange directions. Payments to vendors I'd never heard of. Time entries that didn't match actual hours worked. I sent 3 separate emails to Lindsey, documenting everything, asking for clarification. She responded to all 3 with variations of the same message. "I'll look into it," or "leave the accounting to people who understand the new software." The implication was clear. I was old, behind the times, not capable of understanding modern systems. But I did understand. I understood perfectly. I confided my concerns to Cal, one of the factory floor supervisors who worked directly under our payroll department. "Have you noticed anything weird with your team's overtime payments?" I asked him during a break one afternoon. He looked uncomfortable. "Now that you mention it, yeah. Half my guys haven't gotten overtime compensation in 2 months, even though they've been working 60-hour weeks." I thought it was a processing error. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a small accounting mistake. This was deliberate theft. But I couldn't prove it yet. What I could prove was that something was very wrong. I increased my documentation, printing reports at home, and keeping copies in a safe place. I began photographing records with my phone. I wasn't breaking any laws. All of this information belonged to me as part of my job responsibilities, but I was being careful. I could sense that something dangerous was happening, and I needed to protect myself. 2 months before I was fired, a nervous intern named Tyler cornered me in the break room. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then handed me a folded printout. "You didn't get this from me," he whispered, "but something's really wrong in the accounting department." I waited until I was home to open it. It was a complete report showing falsified time entries and salary diversions into a consulting account. The account was tied to a shell company that appeared to be owned by, I had to read this twice to believe it, Lindsey's fiancé. She was embezzling money from Hartwell. Not incompetence, not a system error. Outright theft, and she was covering it up by blaming the existing systems and the people who understood them.
Me.
She was framing me to cover her crimes. My hands shook as I made copies of Tyler's report and locked them in a drawer. The intern was risking his career by giving me this. I had to use it carefully. The evidence was solid, but I needed to be strategic. If I went to the wrong person, Lindsey would know it was me, and she'd destroy me completely. I needed outside help. A week later, Lindsey called me into her office. I went in expecting her to confront me about something, but instead, she seemed almost playful. "Evelyn," she said, sitting back in her chair like she was about to deliver news I should be grateful for, "I've noticed your attitude lately has been problematic. Very negative. Very focused on things that aren't your responsibility." Victor, my HR head, was sitting in the corner. I hadn't noticed him when I entered. "This was a setup. You're snooping in areas beyond your position, creating unnecessary concerns about processes you don't fully understand," Lindsey continued. "We're going to have to document this." She slid a paper across her desk. It was a formal write-up for insubordination. I was being punished for trying to report fraud. I signed it. I had no choice and walked out feeling sick. But as I was leaving, I heard them talking. Their voices were just loud enough for me to catch the words. "We'll have to get rid of her before she connects the dots," Lindsey was saying. "If she goes to someone above us, she becomes a liability." That's when I knew they had a plan for me. I was going to be eliminated. The question was whether I could get my evidence to the right people before that happened. 3 days later, I lost access to the payroll software. I arrived at work and tried logging in, but my credentials had been disabled. When I asked IT about it, they were vague. Management requested it. That afternoon, an email went company-wide. Due to an employee error, several paychecks were miscalculated for the month of March. "We are correcting this issue and will process supplemental payments accordingly." They were blaming me. Not directly, they didn't use my name. But anyone who'd been paying attention knew that I was the only one with authority to make those kinds of changes. It was brilliant, actually. Evil, but brilliant. By locking me out of the system and then claiming there had been an error, they were painting me as incompetent. If I tried to argue, I'd look defensive. If I tried to explain, I'd look like I was making excuses. Within hours, my reputation inside the company was destroyed. People who'd respected me for decades were suddenly seeing me as the person who'd broken the payroll system. I was called into the disciplinary hearing 2 days later. Lindsey and Victor were there, along with a lawyer the company had hired. My union rep sat beside me, but he looked nervous and unprepared. The evidence they presented was carefully curated to make me look guilty. They showed emails I'd sent about discrepancies, but without context that made it look like I was the one causing the problems. They showed the system errors and made it sound like I'd deliberately caused them. "We're offering you a choice," the company lawyer said. "You can resign with severance, or we can proceed with termination for cause. If you resign, we'll give you 4 weeks of pay and a neutral reference." My rep leaned over and whispered, "Take it. Fighting this will be expensive, and they have the company's resources." But I'd spent 27 years at this company. I'd earn my pension, my benefits. Resigning would mean losing protections. "No," I said. "I didn't do anything wrong. I won't resign." The lawyer smiled like I'd made a mistake. "Then we'll suspend you pending investigation." You'll be on unpaid leave effective immediately. I walked out of that meeting knowing I'd made the right choice, but terrified about what came next. We're getting closer to the moment everything changes.
Hit subscribe now.
They forced me to leave the building the same way they'd brought me in. Security escorted me to my car, while people watched from the windows. It was theatrical, humiliating, calculated to make sure everyone saw that I was being punished. On my way out, Lindsey appeared in the hallway. "You should have retired when you had the chance," she called after me. I didn't respond. I just kept walking. That night, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by evidence. Medical bills from Alan's cancer treatment. My divorce papers. Pay stubs showing I'd never made more than $60,000 a year. The evidence was right. Lindsey had been correct when she said I couldn't afford a lawyer. Good lawyers cost money I didn't have. But as I stared at all the documents spread across my table, I remembered something. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old briefcase. It was dusty, and I hadn't opened it in years. Alan's name was embossed on the leather. Inside were files from his cases, letters from colleagues, contact information. And there, near the bottom, was a business card. David Marks, partner at Marks & Associates Employment Law. I recognized the name. David had been Alan's protege, someone Alan had mentored early in both their careers. They'd stayed in touch for years. If anyone would help me, it would be him. If he was still practicing. If he even remembered Alan. I found his firm's website. He was still there. I sent an email that night, hands shaking. "Dear David, I don't know if you remember Alan Carter. I'm his widow, Evelyn. I need your help." The response came the next morning. "Evelyn Carter? Alan's Evelyn? Of course I remember him. He was the reason I went into employment law in the first place. Tell me everything." I met David in his office a week later. The firm was impressive, sleek, professional, located in a building downtown that smelled like success. David was in his early 60s, fit, with intelligent eyes that reminded me of Alan. As I told him my story, showing him the evidence I'd collected, he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat back and was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that changed everything. "Evelyn, this isn't just wrongful termination. This is fraud, age discrimination, retaliation. You have a strong case." "But I can't afford," I started. He held up a hand. "Do you remember what Alan used to say about justice?" I didn't, actually. It had been so long. He used to say that the most important cases are the ones nobody can afford to fight. Those are the ones that matter most. David leaned forward. "I'll take your case. No upfront costs. We'll work on contingency. But I need to ask you something." "What? Do you want a quiet settlement where they pay you off and we all move on? Or do you want to make them actually pay?" I thought about that for a moment. Then I thought about all the workers who hadn't gotten their overtime. I thought about Tyler the intern risking his career. I thought about all the people I'd mentored over 27 years who might face the same discrimination someday. "I want the truth to come out," I said. David started building the case immediately. He filed papers requesting the company produce all payroll records, vendor accounts, and internal communications. He interviewed current and former employees. He discovered that Hartwell had a pattern of pushing out older workers and replacing them with younger, cheaper labor. He found at least 40 employees who'd been mistreated in similar ways. And he uncovered something that made his eyes go dark with anger. The company had been systematically underreporting overtime to the Department of Labor for years, cheating workers out of millions in compensation. "This goes way beyond your case," David told me. "This is systematic fraud. The question is, are you willing to be the face of this? Because once we go public, your life becomes part of the story." I was terrified, but I was also more certain than I'd ever been. "Yes," I said. "I'm willing." David filed the lawsuit 2 weeks later. Hartwell Industries versus Evelyn Carter. When the company received the papers, their lawyers immediately reached out with a settlement offer. $20,000 to make it go away quietly. David advised me to reject it. "They're panicking," he said. "That panic is how we know we have them scared." But they weren't scared enough yet. Lindsey actually laughed when she read about the lawsuit. She posted something on her personal social media, which David's team screenshotted before she could delete it, that said, "Disgruntled employee thinks she can take on Hartwell? This should be entertaining." She was so confident, so sure that an old, broke woman couldn't possibly threaten her. That arrogance was about to destroy her. The retaliation started small. Anonymous calls to my house at odd hours. A letter left on my car with threats if I didn't drop this foolish lawsuit. Then someone slashed my tires. I reported everything to David. He documented it all carefully and added it to the case file. "This is exactly what I want them doing," he said. "This proves intent. This proves consciousness of guilt." Meanwhile, David was quietly building something bigger. He was preparing to file a class action certification, not just for me, but for all the workers who'd been discriminated against or had their wages stolen. This wasn't going to be a case about one woman anymore. It was going to be a case about a company's systemic abuse of its workers. #13. 3 months into the lawsuit, David's team went through discovery. That's when you're required to produce documents related to the case. Hartwell's lawyers submitted boxes and boxes of files, thinking the volume would overwhelm us or hide the smoking gun. But David had a team of paralegals trained to find exactly what we needed. And they found it. An email chain between Lindsey and the company's CFO. In one email, Lindsey wrote, "We need to get rid of Evelyn. She's too observant and costs too much. Plus, I want her position for my cousin who's willing to work for 40% of Evelyn's salary." In another, "Once we have the payroll system changed over to my oversight, no one will be able to track where the money's going." It was her, in her own words, admitting to the conspiracy. David sat me down and showed me the emails. I read them 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "This is criminal. The DA needs to see this." If you're captivated by how justice is unfolding, hit that subscribe button now. As we approached the court date, things intensified. Hartwell's legal team tried every tactic in the book. They filed motions to dismiss. They tried to discredit me, suggesting I was mentally unstable or dishonest. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial. David countered every single move with meticulous precision. He'd spent 40 years in employment law, and he knew every trick. Meanwhile, the media was starting to pick up on the story. A local journalist named Marcus reached out to me. "I'm hearing about a lawsuit against Hartwell Industries," he said over the phone. "The company's being pretty secretive about it."
Can we talk?
I asked David if it was smart to go public.
He thought about it.
Normally, I'd say no. But in this case, publicity is your best protection. They can't touch you if the whole city's watching. Marcus's article ran in the Sunday paper. "Whistleblower exposes payroll fraud at Hartwell Industries." The story detailed everything: the embezzlement, the age discrimination, the retaliation. It included quotes from other workers who'd been wronged. It included the emails David had uncovered. By Monday morning, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets. By Wednesday, a national business publication had featured it. Hartwell stock dropped 4% on news that a federal investigation was being opened. The company that had seemed so invincible suddenly looked very vulnerable. Lindsey disappeared from work. I found out later she'd taken medical leave. But the company's leadership couldn't hide. The CEO was forced to issue a statement denying wrongdoing while simultaneously announcing they were taking the allegations seriously and cooperating fully with investigators. The contradiction was obvious to everyone. The court hearing was set for a Thursday in May. I dressed carefully that morning, not to impress anyone, but because I wanted to carry myself with dignity. David met me outside the courthouse. He looked confident but also serious. "Today, we present our case," he said. "But first, you need to know something." "What?" "Your name is about to become known to a lot of people. The company's going to try to make you look like a troublemaker, a disgruntled employee who's lying for money. You need to be ready for that." I was ready. I'd had months to prepare for it. We walked into the courtroom together. I sat at the plaintiff's table. Hartwell's legal team sat at the defense table. And then the company's executives walked in. The CEO, the CFO, Victor from HR, and Lindsey. When she saw me, her face went pale. It was the first time we'd seen each other since the day I'd been escorted out. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. David started by presenting my record. 27 years at Hartwell. Promotions, raises, positive performance reviews. Zero disciplinary issues until suddenly, 6 months ago, when I raised concerns about financial irregularities. He presented the timeline of events, showing how my concerns were ignored, how I was punished for speaking up, and how I was ultimately framed for crimes I didn't commit. Then he presented the emails. The judge's expression shifted as he read them. He looked at Lindsey with something like contempt. The defense lawyers tried to argue that the emails were taken out of context, that Lindsey was just venting, that nothing criminal actually happened. But David stood up and systematically dismantled every argument. Your Honor, he said, the emails constitute direct evidence of conspiracy to commit wage theft, age discrimination, and retaliation against a protected whistleblower. The defendant admits in writing to wanting to remove Ms. Carter because of her age and salary, and to wanting to take over the payroll system specifically so oversight would be eliminated. The intent is explicit. When Lindsey took the stand, she made a critical mistake. She lied. She testified that she never wrote those emails, that someone must have forged them. It was such an obvious falsehood. The emails had metadata proving they came from her account, that even the judge seemed almost amused. David approached her with the printed email in his hand. Ms. Ford, he said calmly, are you saying you did not write this email on March 15th at 3:47 p.m.? That's correct, she said, her voice getting higher. I did not write that. And you're saying it's a forgery?
Yes.
Someone's trying to frame me. David smiled slightly, then explained to the court how your email signature, your account identifier, and the exact metadata from Hartwell servers showing transmission from your specific computer are all forgeries. The courtroom went silent. She had no answer. She just kept saying someone must have hacked her account. It was pathetic. Watching her credibility evaporate in real time, I felt something. Not satisfaction exactly. More like relief. The truth was winning. Justice wasn't being twisted into something ugly. It was actually working. The judge ruled in my favor. Hartwell Industries was found liable for wrongful termination, age discrimination, and retaliation. I was awarded damages, and the company was ordered to pay my legal fees. But that was just the beginning. David's class action certification was approved. 43 workers would now be part of the lawsuit, and Hartwell would have to face charges from the Department of Labor for systematic wage theft. The media erupted. The CEO announced his resignation. Investors fled. The company that had been so confident was now drowning. And Lindsey? Her legal problems were just starting. The Department of Labor opened a criminal investigation into the embezzlement. She was arrested the following month on fraud charges. Her fiancé tried to flee the country, but was apprehended at the airport. Every consequence they'd tried to prevent was now catching up with them. A week after the verdict, I received a call from the company's new interim leadership. They wanted to offer me my position back. Full salary, pension restoration, everything. I laughed so hard I cried. No, thank you, I said and hung up. I didn't need Hartwell anymore. I didn't need to prove anything to them. I was finally free. With my settlement money, I did something that mattered more than luxury or comfort. I started a nonprofit organization called the Carter Foundation for Workplace Dignity. The mission was to help older workers facing age discrimination, to provide resources for whistleblowers, to advocate for systemic change in how workers are treated and protected. David joined the board. Cal became one of our first success stories. He was placed in a better job with a company that valued his experience. Tyler the intern came to work for the foundation part-time. We were building something that would help people long after my case was resolved. The national media picked up my story months later. Fired at 57, she took on her company and won. The article detailed everything. My 27 years of service. The fraud I discovered. The humiliation I'd endured. The moment Lindsey told me I was too broke to sue. It went viral. My phone rang constantly. People reached out wanting to share their own stories of workplace discrimination. Other lawyers called asking me to participate in similar cases. Universities invited me to speak. At one of those speeches, an older woman approached me afterward with tears in her eyes. She was 62, had just been pushed out of a job she'd held for 20 years. "You gave me hope," she told me. "When I read your story, I realized I wasn't alone. I'm going to fight back." That moment, that's when I knew everything that had happened was worth it. Lindsey's trial was set for October. The prosecution's case was airtight. The emails, the financial records, the testimony from multiple witnesses. She was convicted on counts of embezzlement, fraud, and wage theft. She received 5 years in federal prison. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't need to. The verdict was already decided. But I did read about it in the newspaper, and I did feel something. Not happiness exactly. Just completion. Justice had its course. The system had worked, not perfectly, but it had worked. I sat down and wrote her a letter, though I knew she'd never read it. In the letter, I thanked her. I thanked her for forcing me to confront her cruelty, for pushing me to fight, for making me stronger than I'd ever been. I thanked her for ultimately proving that integrity matters, that the truth matters, that people like her eventually lose because corruption can't sustain itself forever. 1 year after the verdict, I visited Alan's grave. I hadn't been there much since his death 8 years earlier. It had been too painful. But now, standing at his gravestone, I felt peace. I placed flowers there, and I told him what he already knew. We won Alan. I felt his presence in that moment, not in a supernatural way, but in the way that people we love continue to affect us after they're gone. He taught me about integrity and justice. He taught me that the most important work is helping people who can't help themselves. And through me, he'd been able to continue that work even after his death. The foundation I started bore his name alongside mine, the Carter Legacy Foundation for Workplace Dignity. Every person we helped, we were honoring him. That felt right. That felt like a complete circle. 2 years after I was fired, Hartwell Industries was purchased by a larger conglomerate. The company was restructured, new management was brought in, and most of the old guard, the people who'd perpetuated the fraud, were removed. The workers who'd been part of the class action lawsuit received their settlements. Some chose to return to work at the restructured company with new protections in place. Others, like me, moved forward with their lives. The story of what happened became something of a legend in business circles. Companies started implementing better oversight, better whistleblower protections, better safeguards against internal fraud. My case became cited in training sessions about corporate ethics. I became a speaker at conferences, not because I wanted fame, but because my experience had something to teach. And through all of it, I remained humble. I remained the same woman who'd worn the same car for 10 years, who lived modestly, who defined success by integrity rather than wealth. Years later, on a quiet morning, I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. The neighborhood was peaceful. My life was peaceful. I had enough money from my settlement to live comfortably for the rest of my life, if I was careful. But more importantly, I had purpose. I had the knowledge that I'd stood up to injustice and won. I'd done it not because I was powerful or wealthy or connected. I wasn't any of those things. I'd done it because I had the truth on my side and someone who believed in me. I thought about that day in the HR office when Lindsey laughed and told me I was too broke to sue. I thought about the fear I'd felt, the humiliation, the uncertainty. I thought about how close I'd come to just giving up, to taking the $20,000 and disappearing. And I smiled. Not a bitter smile, but a genuine one. The truth had set me free. Not in a poetic or abstract way, but literally. David appeared in my life exactly when I needed him, because Alan had been a good person who'd mentored him well. Justice had worked, not perfectly, not quickly, but it had worked. And the most important thing? I'd shown that a 57-year-old divorced woman with modest means could challenge a corporation and win. I'd shown that being broke didn't mean being powerless. As I closed my eyes and felt the sun warm my face, I remembered Lindsey's words one more time. "You can't afford a lawyer." And I smiled to myself. Turns out I didn't need to afford one. I just needed the truth. And justice walked in beside me.